Dear viewers of the F2.0 channel, if you think going from the typical 18mm lower limit of a standard kit lens on a crop sensor camera down to 12mm is a small change, you're in for a major surprise today. Stepping those 6mm in the direction of a wider angle is like entering a new world. You may not have noticed how different and cool the objects around you can look. What gets you into this new experience is a small and affordable Samyang 12mm F2.0 NCS CS lens, also sold under the name Rokinon. I'm not usually as excited about the new lens as I am today, because this one can noticeably change your photography and make you see things in a way you haven't before. For a long time, I thought my Fuji XC 15-45mm lens offered a wide enough field of view. But even 15mm feels nothing like the 12mm of the Samyang. It's just wonderful, so different. One should be careful when going ultra-wide because major distortions typically start to kick in. The 12mm is a sweet spot for a wide-angle lens, really wide, but not crazy wide. A curious thing about this lens is that it distorts and bends lines much less than you'd expect. It's very surprising how well it handles the lines. It's no easy task fitting all this wide-angle information onto the sensor, kind of like taking a globe and turning it into a map. On an APS-C system, its angle of view is about 98.9 degrees. The Samyang 12mm is a manual lens available for several camera brands. My copy is for Fuji, and I tend to use it with my Fuji XS10, which has IBIS. I make sure to enter the focal length manually in the menu of my camera so the camera knows that a 12mm lens is attached. The lens feels premium but has the price of a more affordable lens. It's quite light and small, only 73mm by 59mm. Such a nice little thing to carry with you daily. And size certainly matters to me. The f-stop varies from 2 to 16. The lens has got 12 elements in 10 groups and 6 rounded aperture blades. The Samyang has a metal lens mount and one of the best feeling focusing rings. The lens has a meter scale printed on it for better reference. As you'd expect, a lot more turning is required at close distances, and everything that's even a moderate distance away is going to be around the infinity mark. The aperture ring clicks firmly and accurately. The f-stop values are clearly marked, but not all intermediate ones have markings. This is a manual lens, so bear that in mind. Manual focusing works when you have enough time to focus. The lens is not good for fast-moving objects, portraits, or candid street photography. This typically isn't an issue because 12mm is rarely used for portraits or for tracking extremely fast-moving subjects. It's more of a tripod lens. It's a Sunday photography trip kind of lens. Still, this lens is a joy to focus, especially when combined with Fuji's focus peaking. The focusing ring is smooth and has just the right amount of resistance. To get more accurate focus, make it a habit to set the f-stop to 2 for focusing. Then change it back to the value you really want. This is because the shallower depth of field makes focusing issues more apparent. I really like that the lens has a minimal focusing distance of only 20 centimeters. Now I've got a combination of close focusing ability, super wide angle, and an f-stop of 2. This combination can really make your photos look different. So much in the frame, such a unique perspective, and a decent bokeh on top of that. You might fall in love with the freedom this lens gives you. Art is the keyword that comes to mind. I literally smiled to myself when I first saw what this 12mm Samyang can deliver. Because it's a wide-angle lens and the front glass element protrudes far out, you need to use the hood to cut off unwanted side light. The ultra-wide-angle build also means you should either use a very high-quality protective filter or no filter at all. This is because wide-angle rays enter the lens at very shallow angles, and near the edges the filter has to work hard not to interfere with these extreme angles and reduce photo quality. However, I still recommend a protective filter because of how exposed and vulnerable the outer glass is. It's too easy to accidentally touch it with the lens cap, your finger, or a branch in the woods. The filter thread is 67 millimeters. This is quite large, and filters of this size are expensive too. I wish it were smaller because my existing filters are all smaller than 67 millimeters and I don't want to buy new ones. I think the most amazing thing about this Korean lens is how sharp it is, especially in the center. The center is so well defined at any f-stop. While we're talking about sharpness, let me measure the lens sweet spot and compare center sharpness versus corner sharpness. I do this by photographing a plywood board from a tripod using each f-stop. I focus in the middle of the frame, repeat each measurement 3 times, and then average the values for each f-stop. Below is a link that explains this procedure in more detail. This is the overall sharpness graph. It looks kind of steep, but that's partially because I was only 70 centimeters from the board I was photographing. I had to be because the focal length is so wide. What we can tell is that the sharpness sweet spot is at f-stop 5.6. and the lens is almost equally sharp between 4.5 and 6.3. The sharpness begins to suffer beyond f-stop 10 or so. Now, looking at the center sharpness alone, the sweet spot happens a bit earlier, around f4. The center is nicely sharp already at the lowest f-stop of 2. Again, after f-stop 10, sharpness drops. But why did we see the total sweet spot later, at 5.6? Probably partly because the corners were not quite in focus, and increasing the depth of field brought more of them into focus. Let's also look at the corners separately. The sweet spot there is at f6.3. But keep in mind I focused in the middle of the frame, so the corners are slightly out of focus from the start, and it takes increasing depth of field or higher f-stop values to bring them into sharper focus. So we're seeing mixed effects here. Depth of field and sharpness. This is what we want to observe though, because my goal is to evaluate the lens under typical shooting conditions. The incredibly low sharpness in the corners at f2 shouldn't alarm you too much. This is more of a focusing issue. Again, I was only 70 centimeters from my subject. If I had photographed a distant forest, the corners would have been much better. I intend to investigate this further in my future videos, so please stay tuned. Let me also measure the vignetting of this lens and compare it with the Fuji XC 15-45mm at its widest angle, because this is my next widest Fuji lens, and with the Fuji XF 23mm R, because this is my next widest prime lens. I use my own software for this. It's linked below and is very easy to use. Please check it out and provide feedback. I photographed a perfectly white ceiling for these experiments, again using different f-stops. This time each f-stop was used once. Here's what I observed. The Samyang shows massive vignetting when wide open. At f2 the corners are up to 37% darker than the center. This is how I measure and define vignetting here. As you increase the f-stop, vignetting decreases as expected, down to 24% at f4, but then it rises again slightly. This is not typical behavior. There could be many reasons why, such as sensor level effects, lens coating and internal reflections, diffraction and scattering, field curvature, illumination shift, or even experimental artifacts. My white ceiling may not have been as uniformly white as it appeared to me. Anyway, I'd love to hear from you if you've seen this before or if it's just me. When I now add data from the 23mm prime lens, it looks similar, but with much lower overall vignetting, and the line doesn't go back up. Note that I photographed the same white surface. The better vignetting performance of this lens doesn't mean that it's a better lens. We're comparing apples and oranges here. Vignetting is much easier to control in a 23mm lens than in a 12mm one. I also tested the Fuji XC 15-45 at 15mm, and those data are now included too. I saw a slight increase in vignetting at the beginning, followed by a flat line. This lens starts at f3.5, so it never has to deal with the heavy vignetting that comes from very large apertures. So again, we cannot say that it outperforms the 12mm lens. Just to be sure, I repeated these experiments the next day and saw very similar results, so I personally trust my findings. The Samyang displays massive vignetting, especially at f2. With most lenses, I'd consider this a flaw, but here I see it almost as a strength, like George Clooney's gray hair. It just adds character. Plus, it's easy to fix using editing software. Many photographers even add vignetting to their wide-angle shots to create a deeper, more framed look, but this lens already comes with all the vignetting. I did, however, detect a slightly bigger but less frequent issue, lens flare, or prominent purple-colored ghosting artifacts when shooting against strong light sources. I see these purple spots in too many photos. It might work in some photos, but not most. This is my biggest issue with this lens, and it can get annoying. Other than that, this lens renders beautiful colors and great contrast, especially when paired with Fuji's retro film simulations. For some reason, this lens really inspires me to shoot in a retro style. It's a lot of fun. So who needs this lens? I'd say the primary users are landscape, museum, and indoor photographers, maybe astrophotographers. A lot of real estate photographers might find this lens very useful because it can capture such a large portion of a room. It doesn't work for portraits. The subject will look like a bulb head or a cartoon character. I bought some lenses I regret. This one, however, is a definite keeper. It expands my photographing possibilities more than most other lenses and adds real value to my collection. This has been an independent video, by the way. No sponsors, no conflicts of interest, and no interaction with the lens manufacturer or seller. Thank you very much for watching and spending some quality time with me. Please consider subscribing and liking. These actions support me a lot. Let me know what your favorite wide-angle lenses are. See you again soon. Goodbye.